let's shift. Since you've got like two portfolios, some people refer to you as the power minister. At some point in 2015, you were handling like 3 ministries in one: power, housing, and then works. Yes, but that was narrowed down in 2016, I think, to 2.
2019.
2019. My apologies, and that makes it makes still you a power minister, according to some people. Now that you are, in quotes, the power minister, you handled the housing master plan in Nigeria. How well has that been for you, coming from the point of a deficit housing need in Nigeria of about 16 to 17 million?
Okay, so let me start with this famous deficit problem. I've said it and I will repeat it again. Nigeria does not have a deficit housing problem of 17 million or 16 million that has been quoted. So the story is interesting, and I will say it for the record. When I took office, I found that quite challenging. That how do you build 17? Because if it is true, it means we have to build 17 million houses. And I wanted to be sure that the diagnosis was right before we started the remediation. Okay. And I asked people, where did this number come from? And first thing I heard was it was World Bank. So I went to the World Bank country office. I invited the country manager and said no, that it wasn't their figure. So the next thing, somebody said maybe it's African Development Bank. I called the country director. He said no, it's not from them. So 2 down. So I called the National Bureau of Statistics, DG. And he said, look, there's no such figure. And that unfortunately they hadn't done such a survey. But that they do have a household survey. And that the household survey for Nigeria then was roughly about 35 million households. And that his view was that if that was correct, it means that half of Nigerians, if 17 million deficit was correct, it means that half of Nigerian households were homeless. And he did not think that that was the case. So let's just sit there. So at some point in time, I saw another document of government claiming 17 million households. And in the footnote, they actually referred to it. So I started tracking. And I tracked and found out that in 2012, before we came, there was a national housing policy prepared by the Ministry of Housing before our time. And it was in the minister's foreword that they put the 17 million, which everybody has been quoting. There's no scientific basis for it. I called the minister, and the minister admitted to me that there was no survey, and that perhaps under the pressure of work, he didn't check when the document was produced. And that is where we got to the figure we have been running away with, which is baseless, which is unfounded. Now, do we have a deficit? Of course we do. And this is the way to approach the deficit. Where is the housing need most prevalent? Is it in the rural areas? Certainly not. What is the world dealing with? A rural-urban migration. That's what the world is dealing with. The United Nations, every global organization has told you and I that people are living more in cities in the last 50 years than in the entire human history. So it means that people are leaving houses in the rural areas, in their villages, and coming to cities. Many of the people who do so have a home, a shelter of some sort in their rural bases. But they come to the city sweating, squatting for accommodation. So my experience and the data available to me tells me that there is an excess of demand in our urban centers. So if there is a deficit, it is in the urban center. So let us be methodical in how we approach this thing. But even in the urban centers, are there empty houses? There are. So in designing a solution, the solution is not just to go and build. It is to bring the unoccupied empty houses also to the market.
What are you going to do about that one?
Now, I'm getting there. Some of the surveys that I have done suggest to me that there are issues of affordability, because we must also look at housing not only from an ownership side, we must look at it from a renter. Not everybody can own, at least not at the same time. You get onto the property ladder first by renting, and then you become owner. So that we don't start creating all sorts of illusions in the minds of people that, oh, everybody can buy a house at the same time. No. You evolve, it's called a housing ladder. First, you have shelter. That's the origin. And it can be owned or it can be rented. So renting is not a federal responsibility. It's a state matter. And that is why I am advocating for states, state legislators, state houses of assembly to take more interest in what is going on in the rent industry and perhaps make far-reaching legislative interventions. You see, if you see the agony, the anxiety, the stress that families go through when rent is due, you will realize that we haven't, as state governments, put enough energy into that area. There are skits and drama sketches that you probably watched where when the landlord comes to knock the door, the parents send the child to go and say, Mommy is not at home, Daddy is not at home. That dramatizes the seriousness of that problem for you. And it's a place where state governments, state legislators must play. Then let us understand, you were saying that I was in charge of Nigeria's housing policy. No, I'm in charge of the federal side, because housing is also an area of concurrent jurisdiction between states and federal. And we must be very careful. We're running a federal republic, not a unitary republic. One of the biggest, if not the biggest component for delivering housing is land. That is in the control of the states entirely. Federal government doesn't own land, except that given to us by the state. But that said, we have cooperated with the states. We run a national housing program that I am proud of. We built in 35 states and the FCT.
How many units each?
We've made progress. Some of them, each phase, we're building in various phases. In some cases, we're still in phase 1 because of local issues. In some places, we have finished phase 3. In some places, we are about to start phase 3, or we're finishing phase 2 and starting phase 3. What we've done with the states is that I don't want more than 5 hectares. I've been a governor before, and I know how much land we've given federal government before, and nothing happened. I told them, just give us 5 hectares. When we finish, we'll ask for more. And that's why each phase is 5 hectares. And they range from 97 to 105 housing units in each phase. So, but we are in 35 states and the FCT, and I'm proud of that. And people have benefited from those houses. Not the least, our famous Super Eagles, who were promised 24 years ago for winning the Nations Cup and all of the successes that they did our nation proud. And it was only under this administration that that promise was redeemed, because we had this program in place. Of course, we have parastatals like the Federal Housing Authority and the Federal Mortgage Bank. Between them, they have close to about 13,000 housing units also available. The Federal Mortgage Bank has this ministerial pilot housing scheme that started before my time, but we've completed them now. They are opening and commissioning and selling them now. The Federal Housing Authority also has their own housing projects, so we supervise all of those. their flagship project started in this administration is the, I think it's Zuba Housing Estate, which is about 700 and something housing units. So it's a small town, which we have just completed. We are waiting for a date for the president to come and inaugurate that. So I'm proud of what we've done, but there's still much more work to be done. We've increased the rate of mortgage issuance in this administration. We've reduced the entry qualifications for mortgages for certain phases. People who were taking mortgages of 5 million naira and below, they used to have a 10% equity contribution, which was 500,000 naira. And many of them couldn't even raise that money. So we've relieved them of that entry threshold by removing that 10% requirement. For those above 5 million and up to, I think, about 15 million, we reduced the threshold by, I think, from about 15 to 10%, just to make it easier for people to qualify and
get access to those
houses.
I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, that in your explanation of how important it is for Nigerians to get an accommodation, you have people that are way low at the ladder points, below the ladder. And these are people who are maximum, they will be earning for a whole year, maybe probably less than 1 million naira. Do you have a plan to accommodate those kind of people, just so that they are able to get perhaps even a room, self-contained, or just even a room?
You know, while I empathize with people at that level of life, and I tell people I have also been a tenant before, I faced the ignominy of eviction, so I know it. The important thing first is to provide shelter. And that is why I say that provision of housing must be seen on two fronts: rental and ownership. If you don't earn up to a certain level, ownership of a house also brings on its own challenges and responsibilities beyond just buying the house. In some states now, you have to pay a certain level of property tax, you have to do maintenance, and so many things. So if you are not ready, it can become a short-lived joy. So my focus on those people who may not yet be ready is to ask myself, how can we put shelter over them in a rental way first? What can your income afford in terms of rent? And as I've said, first of all, one side, the big lifting is going to be with the states. What kind of rent control laws can they come up with to protect those kind of people? But I've seen something in another federal republic where the federal government now steps in. And what does federal government do? They do a subsidy, a rent subsidy. But as we are struggling with petroleum subsidy, you want to begin to ask yourself, how do you do that? Perhaps maybe if the petroleum subsidy goes and you free up 8 trillion naira, it may be one of the considerations and the debates to have. Can a certain percentage of that go to people's rent support? Because it's a very, very serious problem. And I've told you that drama sketch, those movies, where parents push their children to go and lie, tells you how serious that problem is. And we can't ignore it. So, in my next life, perhaps, one of the things I want to spend time thinking about is, what can we do at the federal level? Because the amount of disposable income that you have, of course, is also now a function. While the state has its own responsibilities, the amount of disposable income you have, your access to income and all of that is also a function of fiscal and monetary policy that federal government is responsible for. And that can also impact access to shelter.